In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. We've got a long gospel reading today. Did you notice that? Did it feel long? It feels long when I'm there in the center, reading to you all. I'm like, oh my gosh, another page. It's a long one, and it's one where we're kind of, I'll explain this in a minute, but we're kind of eating our lunch. I'll say that. What do I mean by that, eating our lunch? Well, this is a long reading because it is a narrative construction that Mark likes to use, where he has really two different stories, right? But he puts them together in what's called a Markan sandwich. So that's the lunch thing. That's stupid. But scholars call this a Markan sandwich because if you notice, there were two stories. There's the story of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, who has a daughter who's ill, right? And then there's the story of the woman who is suffering from hemorrhages and who seeks healing. And the way that Mark puts together the story, we hear the beginning of Jairus' story with the daughter, and then Jesus says he's going to go and do that thing. And then as he's traveling, a whole other healing story happens. And then we hear the end of the first story. It's called a Markan sandwich. Mark likes them a lot. He puts them all throughout his gospel. And what it means is that we have to read them together. It's hard. The lectionary, the way that our gospel readings are split up for us throughout the year, they don't want to split out to just hear, the Jairus and his daughter story. So you end up having to read both stories together. And this comes up again and again in Mark. In terms of it being a narrative device, an editorial decision on Mark's behalf, what does it serve? Why do we do that? Or why does Mark do that? He does it because he wants these stories to be seen together, right? The sandwich is only powerful because it's all of the layers stacked on top of each other. If it was bread and then meat and then it would be like a crudité platter, it's a different kind of a thing, right? Your other gospels are more full of crudité platters and kind of serialized stories where you've got healing, demonic possession, some teaching, healing, demonic possessions, another miracle, where there are these discrete episodic kind of stories that are strung together. But with Mark, he wants to interweave all this stuff because he sees the power of the story and how they comment on each other. They are not discrete stories to Mark. To Mark and to his community, the way that he's trying to convey the message of Jesus, he wants to see everything that Jesus does as connected into instead of episodic television, he sees an arc of a whole story. And so he weaves all these stories within one another. And so then you can look at these stories, this mass of verses, and you can look and find all of these really interesting and intriguing connections, things that are happening in the Greek, and then there's the woman has been bleeding for 12 years, but the daughter is also 12 years old. What's that mean, And all these little intricacies of the story, which makes for a really fun, 20-page New Testament paper for class. It's harder homiletically to pull all that stuff out and to make it mean something. Or to help make it mean something in the context of a sermon where we're saying to ourselves, what is it that we can take away? What speaks to us in this place and time where we are now? It's harder to do all that fun investigatory work and to pull all those different threads in a way that makes some sense. And so what we do when we preach about these things is, one time we preach it, we kind of find this thread, and then another we find this other thread, right? And so I'm just going to pull on one thread within these readings, and it means I'm going to miss a lot. And if you want to talk more about a piece of it, just let me know. I'm happy to talk to you more if something stood out for you. But for me, this week, the thing that stood out to me was, in my mind, kind of comparing and contrasting the way that these two individuals approach Jesus and ask him for his help, right? These two people who are both afflicted in their own way, one on behalf of someone else and one of her own volition, the way that they come and talk to Jesus, I think it says something to teach us about who they are. It says something, as it should, about who Jesus is. And then it tells us something about how we should approach Jesus with our own wonderments, our own pain, our own prayers and suppositions, our own inquiries of Jesus. So on the one hand, we have Jairus. Jairus, did you notice? Jairus is the only person other than Jesus and the disciples who has a name in the story. Did you notice that? His daughter doesn't have a name. The woman who's been bleeding for 12 years doesn't have a name. Jairus is the only one who has a name. And we're told that he is a leader of the synagogue, which means that he's probably a Pharisee. Which means that he interprets the law in a certain way, and that he's the leader of the local synagogue. So he is a Pharisee, part of that cohort that Jesus has been contending with for the entirety of his story up to this point. The Pharisees are always kind of around in the backgrounds of the stories, kind of at the edge of the crowds. They're always the ones that are kind of standing there in the background with their arms crossed, like just waiting for Jesus to say something or for his disciples to do something so they can ask about it, to challenge Jesus. So we're told that he's a leader of the synagogue, probably a Pharisee. I wonder if he had been one of those who had been standing in the background watching Jesus. He certainly knows about Jesus, right? He comes to Jesus knowing that Jesus has the power to heal his daughter. And so there's part of me that thinks that he might have been there. He might have been in those earlier stories. He might have been part of those cohorts of Pharisees and Sadducees who came up to challenge Jesus about his teachings or about something that his disciples had done. But he's a Pharisee, so that means he's a powerful man. That power is redoubled by the fact that he is the only one with a name in this story. We're meant to notice that, to see that. Jairus, okay, he must be important. That people know him, okay? Jairus. And he is coming to Jesus to ask for his help with his daughter who's been sick. She's 12 years old. She's sick to the point of death. Later on in the story, people think that she has already died. And Jesus doesn't see that, but she is very sick. So he comes on her behalf, on his own behalf. He's in the midst of his own grief at the thought of losing his child, of course, right? But then also comes to advocate for her and to ask for Jesus' help. So Jesus hops off the boat, and Jairus comes up to him. And rather than approaching him the way those Pharisees do, how the Pharisees come and they talk to Jesus, right? Do they have any doubt in their minds? Do they have any humility about what they're going to challenge Jesus about? No. Jesus is a Pharisee as well. He's one of their equals, right? And he's messing up. So the Pharisees usually, they come up to him and they kind of it's like Roadhouse, Like they come up and it's like they're gonna square off with him. They're big and burly, intellectually big and burly, and they come up and they talk to Jesus and they say, "What are you doing, Jesus? Come on," right? That's how they know how to talk to Jesus. But does Jairus do that in this moment? No. Jairus comes, and we're told before he says anything, he comes and he falls at Jesus' feet. He falls at Jesus' feet, and the gospel said, begged him repeatedly, saying, "Come and heal my daughter. She is sick to the point of death." He falls at his feet to ask Jesus. That's how he chooses to approach Jesus, not in the way that he is entitled as a man, as a fellow Pharisee, as a scholar. He could easily have seen it as his role to come up and to make Jesus do something. But no, he humbles himself and asks for Jesus' help, falling at his feet. So hold that in your brain, right? And then we're told about this woman who has been hemorrhaging, has a bleeding illness of some sort, and she's had it for 12 years. She's been trying to get it fixed, to figure out what's going on. Nothing is helping. We're told it's even worse than it was when it started. And we're told that Jesus is, as he's moving, for Jairus' story, moving through the crowd, we're told that this woman knows in her heart that all she needs to do is just touch the hem of his cloak and she will be healed. That is what her faith is telling her. That is what she's heard about the power of Jesus. And we're told that there's such a kind of throng of people, like a rabble of people around him, pressing in on him, that she has to really power through that group of people to get up to the point where she can touch him, right? One of the things I listened to this week described it as it's almost like, imagine, and it's like an ambulance that's on its way through rush hour or something, and there's this massive crowd and whatever, and the driver of the ambulance, there's a little bit of a fender bender, something happens, right? And the ambulance stops and says, "Who hit me? Somebody hit me." And you can hear in his disciples' voices this almost frenetic, frantic kind of thing. They're like, "Jesus, we're trying to go somewhere. Aren't you going to heal this girl who's about to die? Why are you stopping and asking who touched you? Literally everybody touched you. You are in this midst, this big throng of people." But Jesus feels the touch. It works. She is healed immediately just by touching the hem of his cloak. Right? This woman approaches Jesus differently than Jairus does. Right? She is a much lower social standing than Jairus. She is nameless. Right? She's a woman, so she's already lower on the social realm of social import. But she's someone who's also been publicly ill, right, for 12 years. Right? Publicly ill. People know that she has been bleeding. And so she is more and more down the rung of social importance. I would imagine that she's even almost an outcast, right? She's the kind of person that people would choose to walk around, right, rather than engage directly. She is socially outcast in the midst of also being ill. And so here she is presented with an opportunity. Jesus is there, surrounded on all sides by his disciples, almost like bodyguards, right? Following to do a task for one of the most powerful men in the village, Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, right? That's ecclesiastical power. It's also temporal power. All these people surrounding her as well. She's presented with a problem. I know I need to touch Jesus. How am I going to touch Jesus? How am I going to encounter Jesus? And she has to confront that thing which has repelled her, or which has repelled itself from her for the last 12 years. She has to work her way through the crowd. She has to elbow her way through the crowd to reach the point where she touches Jesus. She has to step up. She has to claim her power. She has to become different than she is different than society would have her be, She has to claim her power to be able to get to Jesus. And does it work? It works. Her faith makes her well, right? And then she and Jesus have an interaction. And in that interaction, as she's realizing that she's about to be caught, red-handed, then she falls at his feet at that moment in gratitude, in thanksgiving for what has been accomplished. Even though Jesus didn't actively do it, right? She's the one who took the agency. She is grateful that it has happened. So we have in this sandwich, we have two different approaches. And what is incredible about these two different approaches is that they sort of match up, I think, with each other, but in different light. We have the powerful man who really just wants the help to heal his daughter. And in order to get that, he has to be different than he is. He has to let go of his power and approach Jesus humbly. Now, does Jesus care? Would Jesus help him? I think Jesus would help him either way. But I do think that part of Jairus' faith, in part of Jairus' faith, he knew that he needed to let go of some of his power, to give the power over to Jesus, to not demand something of Jesus, but rather to let Jesus make the decision by humbling himself, saying, I don't have to be oppositional to you, Jesus. I don't have to be an enemy. I am willing to recognize your power because it can help my daughter, right? So he lets his power go, and then this woman claims her power to be able to get to Jesus. These are powerful oppositional forces that are about power and letting oneself claim what is one's own and to let go of what one assumes is one's own. And so I wonder, and I've been thinking over the course of this last week, how is it that I approach Jesus? How is it that in prayer, when I am feeling like I need to talk to Jesus, ask for help, support, healing, whatever it is, how do I approach Jesus? And I have to say that I don't approach Jesus in either of those ways. Right? I don't know about you, but sometimes my prayer life looks like me just sitting there thinking about, like, narrating my day. And then at the end of it, or like later on, going, what in the world was I even doing there? You know, I'm just sitting there, I'm just like, yeah, and then today this happened, and the kids were kind of a pain, and then Michael did this, and then my boss did this, and, you know, I'm just sitting there kind of talking. And then I finish, and I'm like, okay, like, I'm glad I took that time to narrate my day, but also, why am I talking to Jesus about it? You know, do I have an ask? Is there something that I need from Jesus? And it's hard to think about that because I haven't done the actual reflection to imagine, what is it that I'm asking? Jairus and the woman both know what they're asking Jesus. They have clarity of purpose. And that clarity of purpose allows them to figure out what they need to claim or let go of so that they can approach Jesus in the way that they need to approach Jesus. Jesus doesn't need them to approach him in any specific way. Jesus doesn't need us to approach in any specific way. But we need to be clear about what we bring to Jesus and about how we bring it to Jesus. If I have an inflated sense of self and I go to Jesus and say, Jesus, listen, I don't know if you know, but I'm not a normal priest. I'm a canon to the ordinary. That means I have the privilege of seeing the bishop basically every day. So you need to help me with this thing, Jesus. Okay? That's not great, right? That's not going to go very well for me. For me, again, Jesus doesn't care, but Jesus knows what's going on in my heart. His message to both of these people is, your faith has made you well. Do not doubt, but believe. And if I don't trust in Jesus enough to let go of my sense of self-importance, then how am I going to have the faith that's going to help make me well? At the same time, there are not many times in my life, I'm very privileged in my society, right? In a variety of ways, there are not many times in my life when I have to claim power, but I know plenty of people who do. I know some of you are in this room. You are a child of God. Paul tells us that you are a step-sibling of Jesus. You've been adopted by God in your baptism. You have the power to claim your power, claim your childhoodship, and to approach Jesus and ask. Not to say, oh, Jesus knows and he'll come or whatever, but to make the decision to claim your divine childhood and to say, God, Jesus Christ, I am in need. Make a decision on how you will approach Jesus, but approach, because Jesus is there. Every Sunday we come, we take communion together. We remember and recognize and affirm in one another that Jesus is waiting for us, is there with open arms waiting to bless us. But what transformation do you need to go through? Do you need to let go of some entitlement to be able to approach Jesus? Or do you need to claim some entitlement to approach Jesus? That's a personal thing. And it's going to shift for you throughout your life. There's going to be times when you're going to feel like you're on top of the world and you're going to need to let some stuff go. And there's going to be times in your life when you are down and you're going to need to claim God's love for you as your purpose, as your permission to touch the hem of Jesus. And only then do we find that healing. Only then do we respond in gratitude and fall at his feet and be told, your faith has made you well. Whether you're on the top, whether you're on the bottom, whether you're in between, Jesus is waiting. Ask. Amen.